Hello everyone and welcome to this Q&A. I ended up receiving a good number of questions and have done the best I can to answer all of them while keeping this video as short as possible. Still, this is going to be longer than any of my lore videos, so let's just get to it. Question 1. Why did you change your channel name? When I decided to do this Q&A, I knew of two questions I would get for sure. This is one of them, and I'll answer it straight away since it's easy to answer. I simply think that Double Negative is a better name. I know not everyone agrees with that, but it may help if you know that Decadence Knight has never actually meant anything. I made up the name on a whim when I was 17 and I had to come up with an Xbox Live gamer tag on the spot. My brother and I were at a friend's place to play the Halo 3 beta, and I didn't have a gamer tag yet. I needed one to play, so I had to come up with a name right then and there without thinking about it too much. I picked two words that 17-year-old me thought sounded cool together, hence Decadence Knight was born. From then on, anytime I needed to make a new username for something, it was Decadence Knight. So not only is the name utterly meaningless, it ended up becoming something generic. When I first started making Let's Play videos and uploading them to YouTube, I named the channel Decadence Knight more out of habit than anything else. I've actually thought about changing it for a number of years now. When I came up with Double Negative, it just clicked. The tone fits the content of the channel, I like the cadence of it, it has meaning, there were no major channels using that name, and since it was the same initials, I wouldn't have to update my logo or any of my thumbnails. I decided to jump on it while I had the chance before the channel got too big to feasibly make such a change. So that's the long answer. The short one is that I just like Double Negative better. Question 2. What made you want to make this channel? The reason I started making and uploading Let's Play videos was that I really needed a productive hobby. I had graduated college about a year prior to that, and I was stuck working this crappy, barely above minimum wage job. I was living with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, but she was on a totally different work schedule. So I was miserable at my job, and I had a lot of free time on my hands. I decided on Let's Plays as a hobby because I like watching Let's Plays, and I had some technical background from college in video editing and graphic design and such. I figured I'd be good at it, and that if I couldn't find a job using those skills, I could at least use them to do this. Question 3. What motivated you to start the Elder Scrolls lore series? All it took was becoming aware of the idea of lore videos. For a while, when I was doing Let's Plays, I was mildly active on the r/Let's Play subreddit. It was there that I saw an AMA by a larger channel, though I forget which one it was. They explained how they started gaining popularity after they started making Fallout lore videos, and I thought, Fallout lore. That sounds fun and interesting. I could do Elder Scrolls lore. And that was it. I was close to the end of my current Let's Play, so instead of commencing a new one, I started making the lore videos, which is undoubtedly what has made the channel what it is today. And that's just great by me. Not only are they more popular than my Let's Plays ever were, but they're more fun to make. Question 4. Do you have any plans to start streaming? I do not have any plans to stream in the future. I have floated some ideas around for a modded Morrowind playthrough, which could work as a stream. That might be fun, but I feel that my time would be better spent working on the content I have in the works already. Also, I've come to realize that I'm a much better writer than I am at improvising. I'm pretty good at reading a script, but coming up with things to say on the spot does not come easily for me. Besides all that, I don't really care for live streams. I have nothing personal against the format, it's just not for me. Even with Let's Play channels that I otherwise enjoy, when they do a stream, I'm simply not into it. So if I don't know what it is that makes for a good live stream, it doesn't make much sense to do one myself. So while I don't completely rule out the possibility, I don't think it'll ever happen. Question 5. Will you do any lore series other than the Elder Scrolls? Not in the foreseeable future. It is something I've thought about, so I'm not taking it off the table entirely. However, for the time being, I think it's best to keep my focus small and not bite off more than I can chew. So it's certainly possible in the future, but not yet. Question 6. How do you find material for your Elder Scrolls lore videos? What made you choose those exact stories and myths? Well, the first two lore videos, the Dawn Era and the People of Tamriel, were pretty logical choices. You have to get the exposition down before you can get into the things that are more in-depth and really interesting. As well as providing that foundation for the audience, making those episodes helped me to understand those basics before venturing off into the more obscure stuff, which was essential. Since those first two episodes, I've just been drawing from the things in the lore that I've heard of naturally and want to look into further. If it's interesting and there's enough material, it may get turned into an episode. As for how I choose what to do next, it depends partly on what I've done recently. If I just did a racial video, I'd switch gears and talk about a significant event or a major historical figure. It also just depends on what I feel like. There really isn't a defined process there. The actual finding of the material is fairly easy if you know generally what you're looking for. There are some wonderful resources out there, the two best ones by far being the Imperial Library and UESP. A million shout outs to them. Those sites are indispensable sources of information. Question 7. What makes Elder Scrolls lore so special for you? I've never really thought of it as special per se. It's just very interesting to me. I think a big part of it might be the puzzling nature of it. I realize that this is not by design, but the fact that there are wildly disparate sources covering the same topics in this universe makes for some interesting problems to solve when trying to write about it. I love a good puzzle, and the lore of the Elder Scrolls provides many puzzles. Really though, it's just what I like. Some people love the Star Wars expanded universe. Some people are super into Tolkien. I like the Elder Scrolls. It's just my thing. Question 8. What part of the Elder Scrolls lore is the most interesting to you? Well, like I said, the puzzling nature of it is a big reason. But one specific aspect which I quite like is something I touched on in the first lore episode. When it comes to the belief systems and pantheons of the various races in Tamriel, they're all basically the same, but each race adds their own flavor to it. The Khajiit belief in the lunar lattice is a prime example of that. In real life, many of our own myths about creation, the afterlife, etc. are essentially the same exact stories. The characters just have different names. Over time, though, these stories have developed distinct cultural flares that make them unique from each other. I really like that the Elder Scrolls universe has that same characteristic in many of its myths. Question 9. What do you think about the more metaphysical aspects to the Elder Scrolls lore? Concepts like CHIM, Amaranthe, the Walking Ways, and the Godhead. The first rule of CHIM is you do not talk about CHIM. The second rule of CHIM is, you get the idea. I hate CHIM. It is so bizarre and confusing and obscure. And it's so wrapped up in fan theory and relies on so many unofficial sources that making any real sense out of it is basically impossible. The primary and one of only a few in-game sources that deals with CHIM is the 36 Lessons of Vivek. Try reading some of those sermons sometime and see how seriously you can take the ideas it broaches. Part of what makes CHIM such a difficult topic is that if it's a real thing, then no ordinary being that has ever existed in the mortal plane would have even the slightest clue about the very idea of CHIM. The only exceptions would be those who have achieved CHIM, like Vivek supposedly has. So it makes sense why almost nobody in the universe has written about it, which conveniently explains the lack of additional in-game sources. It's a self-explaining, self-feeding concept, and I don't like that. If you ignore the obscure 100% unofficial source material, which I generally do, there's almost nothing left. I'll grant that CHIM and the Godhead and all that stuff is interesting to think about. However, with the lack of substantial corroborating in-game sources, I cannot take any of it as anything more than fan theory. Anyway, now that I have thoroughly ruffled the feathers of the hardcore Elder Scrolls lore community, question 10. You have the choice to make an Elder Scrolls story outside of Tamriel. Which continent would you choose and why? Akavir. Partly because of the variety of environments on the continent, some of them seeming very alien compared to Tamriel. That could be a lot of fun. Also, we'd finally get a definitive answer on the physiology of the Saesi. There are many references in the lore to them being literal snake people, but there's significant evidence to the contrary as well. By the way, snake people would be way cooler than ordinary humans, so if they're not snake people, I'd be very disappointed. Question 11. Are you worried that the new Bethesda's business model will affect the Elder Scrolls 6? Yes. Yes, I am. Question 12. What are your hopes/expectations for Elder Scrolls 6? What features are most important for you to see in the game? I think it's far too early for actual expectations, especially considering Bethesda of late. At this rate, it could very well end up being yet another pay-to-win live service. Hopefully that ends up not being the case. There are some reasonable things I think we can at least hope for, though. I'd love it if spellmaking came back. That was conspicuously absent from Skyrim, and I did miss it quite a bit. Personally, I'd like it if they brought back the Morrowind-style armor, where the pauldrons were separate pieces from the cuirass, and you had discrete left and right pauldrons and gauntlets. That allowed for a lot more customization, which was something I missed in Oblivion and Skyrim. I don't see much chance of that happening, but, you know, I'm allowed to hope. A big one would be for the world to be more seamless. I never liked having to load a new space when entering cities, and I'm hoping that with new console hardware, it would be technically feasible to do away with that. You know, since we have to work to the lowest common denominator, we always have to design for the weakest consoles out there. But I mean, the Morrowind managed it on the original Xbox, so I don't see why Elder Scrolls 6 shouldn't be able to manage it on whatever current gen hardware is out there. Also, larger cities would be fantastic. Solitude, for instance, is a port city. It's the biggest in Skyrim, yet it's only composed of something like a dozen or so buildings in the game. That's also due to technical limitations, which hopefully will be reduced by the time the game is actively being developed. By far the biggest hope I have would be for the world and the characters to actually just feel fuller. I'd love it if it felt more like an actual lived-in environment. Don't get me wrong, I love Skyrim, but it starts to feel pretty shallow after a little while. Those are all of varying levels of importance to me, but really we'll just have to wait and see. Question 13. Do you have a favorite Elder Scrolls game in terms of gameplay, story, lore, etc.? What Elder Scrolls game is your overall favorite? In terms of gameplay alone, it's honestly too close to call. Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim all have very distinct strengths and weaknesses when it comes to gameplay. I can honestly say that I have enjoyed all three of them about equally. I know it's a cop-out, but I really can't choose. If I absolutely had to choose, gun to my head, which one has the best gameplay, I might go with Oblivion, just because it's a nice, happy middle ground kind of in between Skyrim and Morrowind. Some of the over complex aspects of Morrowind's gameplay combined with some of the oversimplified aspects of Skyrim gameplay. So Oblivion's kind of right in the middle. So if I had to choose in terms of gameplay, I'd say Oblivion, but it's not an easy choice by any means. In terms of storytelling, it's Morrowind by a country mile. Some of the faction quest lines are pretty weak, but the main story more than makes up for that. I love that as the character you're playing, you're not actually destined to be the Nerevarine. You have to consciously work for it, and you're shown that you could very well end up failing. You're not just the right person in the wrong place that makes all the difference. That aspect alone, that feeling of player agency, plus the fact that you're not fending off an impending apocalypse, at least not directly, makes it my favorite. In terms of lore, even though I've barely played it, I think I have to go with Daggerfall. The sheer volume of lore that it added is absolutely immense. It introduces a lot of the concepts that are taken for granted in the subsequent games, like the Interregnum, the Dark Brotherhood, even the Thuum, which wasn't fully explored until 3 games down the line. And talking about interesting puzzles, the Warp in the West is one hell of a puzzle. I'll have to spend an episode on that at some point. If I had to choose an overall favorite, the obvious choice is Shadowkey. I'm kidding, it's Morrowind. To be fair, there's quite a bit of nostalgia involved with that. It was one of the first RPGs I ever played, not counting Pokemon. I have very fond memories of it. It also depends, and honestly, it also depends on what I'm in the mood for. Skyrim is certainly easier to pick up and screw around with for a while. Same goes for Oblivion, and I have fond memories of that one as well. But if I had to choose, Morrowind just barely wins, edging out by nostalgia. Question 14. What is your favorite villain in the Elder Scrolls franchise? I love me a good orator. Someone who's charismatic and able to manipulate their way to power, then use their influence over others to achieve their goals through indirect means. Ideally, the goal in and of itself is a noble one, but the means the villain uses to go about achieving it are horrendous, despicable, and evil. My favorite villain of all time is Shogo Makishima from Psycho-Pass. Watch the first season of that show. It is incredibly good. We don't have a villain of that level in the Elder Scrolls, unfortunately. The closest we get is Mankar Camoran, who orchestrated the Oblivion Crisis. You know, he's pretty good and pretty compelling, and you know, he was able to accomplish quite a bit, you know, for a guy basically working by himself, you know, along, you know, in collusion with a Daedric lord, of course, but Mankar Camoran was pretty good. Also, it turns out that Tiber Septim is a bit of a bastard when you look into his deeds. Hero to mankind, yes, but can certainly be viewed as a villain with the right perspective. More on that at a later time. Question 15. What is your favorite Elder Scrolls race and why? I'm partial to Morrowind, and that means I'm partial to the Dunmer. I like their history. I like the disparate cultures when it comes to the Great Houses and the Ashlanders, the variety of their architecture, and of course, who doesn't love a trio of power-hungry, insane living deities? The Dunmer are pretty awesome. As far as what I like to play as, it entirely depends on what skills I plan on utilizing. They're all good when played appropriately. If I'm going for more of a magic-based character, I'll usually go with a Breton. For someone who's more stealth-based, I'll go with a Khajiit or a Wood Elf a lot of the times. Wood Elf is what I'll use a lot. If I'm going for kind of a sort of jack of all trades, I'll go with something like a Dunmer. And then for combat, you go with either Orc or Nord. Orc is a little bit more fun. Nord just kind of seems kind of vanilla to me. Orc is pretty fun. But yeah, as far as gameplay goes, yeah, whatever. They all play pretty much the same. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. Question 16. Which side are you on in the Skyrim Civil War? Well, the quest line sucks regardless of who you choose, but that's another topic entirely. The Empire gets a bad rap in Skyrim. After a hard-fought war with the Aldmeri Dominion, they were forced to accept a difficult peace treaty. Titus Mede II chose to live to fight another day rather than be wiped out, which is completely understandable. If Skyrim's true goal is to shake off the control of the Dominion over Tamriel, they'd be working with the Empire, not against it. Ulfric Stormcloak is a megalomaniac, pure and simple. He's more interested in being High King than he is in protecting Skyrim's interests. That's my take on it anyway. Question 17. Which leveling/ability system do you prefer? The one from Oblivion or Skyrim? I'm really starting to sound like a politician here, but there are benefits to each one. I really like the immersive, character-defining aspect of the Morrowind/Oblivion system, where you really have to specialize and you can't feasibly be good at everything. Even trying to do everything would be a waste of time because only leveling your major skills allows you to level up your attributes. This is even more pronounced in Morrowind, where your skill proficiencies affect your advancement in factions. So if you try to be a jack of all trades in Morrowind, you will not get far in basically any of the factions. So that's another thing to consider when it comes to that system. So I like I said, I really like the character defining aspect of that and sort of the realism when it comes to factions. Some spell slinging mage is not going to be able to advance very far on the Fighters Guild realistically. And I really like that. However, it can be argued that that sort of system is excessively restrictive. The Skyrim system does give you a lot more freedom and lets you develop your character organically. And, there's something to be said for that. There's also much less planning involved, which allows you to get straight to the game. I also really like the ability perks in Skyrim. It's a great way to add variety to the gameplay, and it's a better way to demonstrate a growing skill proficiency than simply doing more damage. I do think that Skyrim oversimplified things by getting rid of attributes and certain skills. In a perfect world, I would take aspects of both. Question 18. Do you play on PC or console? PC, although I did play on the Xbox 360 a lot when that was current gen. In fact, that's how I first played Oblivion and Skyrim. Morrowind I always played on PC. But once I could afford to build a decent gaming PC, I took that plunge and never looked back. My last couple playthroughs of Skyrim were on PC with mods, and it is glorious in comparison. I highly recommend Beyond Skyrim Bruma. It's really good. Speaking of consoles, I have mildly considered getting a Switch, but nothing else on the current console market really interests me at all. Question 19. What is your opinion on Skyrim modding projects like Skyblivion and Beyond Skyrim? Love them. As I said, Beyond Skyrim Bruma is fantastic. I'm eagerly awaiting their next installment. The Beyond Skyrim project in particular is something for which I have a great deal of respect. They seem to be doing a good job of managing it, and separating out the project into the different regions and prioritizing them one at a time is a great idea. It yields results, as we're seeing. Skywind and Skyblivion seem far more ambitious. I don't know if they'll ever see full completion, but I dearly hope so. I get so giddy every time there's a new Skywind trailer. There are some very talented people working on those projects, and my hat's off to them. I wish them all the success there is. And hey, Black Mesa eventually came out, so you never know. Maybe we will be playing Skyblivion someday. By the way, if any of you listening are involved in managing any of those mods, or if you know someone who's handling the dialogue, I would be interested in providing voice work. Let me be an Imperial City bum, if nothing else. That would be amazing. And finally, question 20. Why do you take such long breaks in between episodes? I said at the beginning that there were 2 questions I knew I would get in this Q&A. This is the second one, and I've saved it for last because I want to take the time to explain it as best I can. The first part of this answer is simply that the Elder Scrolls lore videos really do take a lot of work to make. It's a multi-phase process which goes from research to writing to asset gathering to voiceover recording and finally editing. I've never timed myself on the earlier phases, but editing takes an average of around an hour per minute of video, depending on complexity. Something like the Imperial Simulacrum episode takes around 16 hours. And since I have a wife and a full-time job, I have precious little free time these days. At the 2 to 3 hours a week I can typically afford to spend, editing alone takes 2 months. That's only a partial answer, though. I've spent a good amount of time thinking about how I'd want to go about addressing this. It turned out that the answer was right next to me the whole time. You see, when the channel first started gaining some mild popularity, probably around the time it hit 1,000 subscribers or so, I wrote a set of rules for myself. I printed them out and taped them to the wall next to my desk so they're always in my peripheral vision. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it's composed of 2 sections. The first is about the kinds of videos I would make, and the second is about how I want to interact with the community. What this last section essentially boils down to is 2 things. Don't take negative comments personally, and don't be a dick. These things should be obvious, but I've seen so many personalities fail in those 2 simple concepts that I decided to codify them for myself. I'm proud to say that by this point, I have never violated those rules, and I'm not about to start. For me, part of not being a dick is to always be honest. The main issue I had when deciding on how to answer this is that I was concerned that the honest answer would sound like I'm just making excuses. I'll tell you right now that this is not the case. I know some of you are still going to see it that way, so I ask that you look at it logically. This channel and the videos I make are something I do because I enjoy it. This isn't my job, nor is it any other kind of obligation. I don't have to explain anything to anyone. Therefore, I have no reason whatsoever to make excuses, and you can take what I'm about to tell you as nothing more than the information it is. I have recently been diagnosed with ADHD. What I have is the inattentive subtype, which is what used to be called attention deficit disorder, or ADD. I was only diagnosed a few months ago, but this is something I've dealt with for practically my entire life without having realized it. Even with things that I enjoy and want to do simply for the sake of doing them, such as this channel, making myself do it can be very difficult. I've always been a habitual procrastinator. When I do start working on something, I tend to get sidetracked easily. Sometimes I'll fully intend on doing something, then sit down to do it only to have lost interest or even forgotten about it entirely. Even with this channel, something I like and want to do, this happens. It's not a matter of willpower, and it's not due to a lack of motivation. It's just how my brain works. For me, this has been normal pretty much forever. And this is how you get those long periods of nothing being put out on the channel. The way it's usually gone down is that I'll be working somewhat steadily, then something will happen in my life that causes a legitimate delay, when I got married, for instance. Then after that delay is done with and should be out of the way, I keep continually putting off working on the channel, saying, oh, I'll work on it tomorrow, or next week will be different. I'll edit for an hour every day, etc., etc. Then all of a sudden, a month or two has gone by without anything getting done, and I feel guilty about not having done anything, which actually makes it harder to pull myself together and get to work. Eventually, after a lot of outside encouragement and or beating myself up, I'm able to get back to it. I'm only just now realizing that my brain is what's causing this. I know this sounds like I'm making excuses, and I know this sounds like the typical millennial cry of, but it's not my fault. Forget whatever this sounds like. Frankly, it's not my fault, but that doesn't mean I'm shirking responsibility for my actions. Anyway, I'm not on trial here. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm just here to provide an explanation, and there it is. Beyond the explanation for the past, I can assure you that I am doing my best to try and prevent this going forward. I am seeking treatment for my ADHD. It's been more of a pain in the ass than I expected, but I'm working on it. And for about the last 2 or 3 months, I've been able to do moderate amounts of work on the channel a few times a week with some consistency. Time will tell here, but I'm doing my best. That's all there is. So anyway, that is it for this Q&A. Thank you very much for all of the questions that you sent in. Thank you very much for sitting through this whole video and indulging me in sharing a little bit about myself and the channel. I really do appreciate it. So that is about it. That about covers it. Maybe this was pretty fun. This is something I like doing. So, maybe if we get to 50,000, we'll do another one of these. So again, thanks very much to everybody who subscribed. 25,000 is awesome, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you very much, and I will see you on the next video, whatever that may be.